There we are. Looks like we're all back. So greetings to the participants for this panel that I'm very pleased to be able to facilitate. My name is Sandy Husk, and I am the CEO at AVID Center, also a career educator, starting in the classroom all the way through 18 years as a superintendent before I took this position. And it's my honor to be able to interact with three wonderful colleagues who you're going to get to know here in just a minute. Just a few words about the topic for the panel today. The reason for this topic is because we are all very passionate about equity and access into STEM careers. It's obviously important for the corporate world as they continue to recruit and retain great talent. It's important to educators to be sure that all different kinds of students are getting access to high-level, impactful careers. And of course, it's important to our families and our democracy as we work to strengthen ourselves as a nation. So with that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll go in the order that I'll be asking the questions today. We're going to go for about 30 minutes with some pre-planned questions and dialogue from the panelists, and then we will open it up for Q&A. Just a reminder, when we get to Q&A, please use your Q&A function. We won't be able to see the questions in using the chat function. And so with that, to my dear friend and colleague, Susan Enfield, would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sandy, and hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I am Susan Enfield. I am the proud superintendent for Highline Public Schools. We are a richly diverse school system just south of Seattle. When you land at SeaTac International Airport, which hopefully you'll be doing in the near future, our district surrounds the airport. We're just under 18,000 students, grades pre-K through 12. And when I say we're richly diverse, I mean it. We have over 100 different languages spoken across our system, and the top ones being Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. And rather than a mission or vision in Highline, we have what we call our Highline Promise, which I think is really relevant to our topic today about equity and access. And that promise is that we in Highline commit to knowing every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose.
Thank you. And to my new friend and new colleague, Miriam, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Miriam Brady. I lead our program management team within digital inclusion in the Microsoft Philanthropies division. So we essentially focus on skilling all of those historically excluded based on race, gender, or geography from opportunities within tech.
And thank you. Hyla, another new friend and colleague. Would you please go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Hyla Barbeau. I'm here today from Amazon Future Engineer. We are a social impact organization within Amazon, really dedicated to broadening access to computer science education with a focus on historically marginalized groups, especially working to broaden access to underrepresented students. And I lead our work really in exploratory learning and how we can get that initial spark to really get more students interested earlier on. So yeah, super excited to be here.
Excellent. And I might just mention that Microsoft and Amazon are also already demonstrating great partnerships in the public sector, including with the Highline School District and with AVID Center, and we very, very much appreciate that. And that's why part of the theme of our panel today is about partnerships between private and public sector and how it really builds a strong community. At AVID Center, we are focused on providing the best professional learning support for educators across our nation. We're a 40-year nonprofit that's been highly successful in proving that when you provide the right belief systems, attitudes, use of data, pedagogy, and really focus on all students, that we can ensure that all students can and will rise to the occasion and be able to access learning and just opportunities in their life that they may not have even thought about. And that's one of the many reasons why these partnerships are so important to us, and particularly in the STEM careers, as more and more we know that students will be facing multiple careers in their life, and that focusing on things that require technology, science, engineering, and mathematics are especially important because they've not traditionally been accessed by females in great numbers, children in poverty, or children coming from diverse racial backgrounds. So Susan, could you talk a little bit about the STEM opportunity gaps that you see for your students in Highline, and what are some of the needs?
Let me try unmuting myself. I would say that what I'm going to name is not in any way unique to Highline, but I will talk about it from the Highline's perspective. I'll lump it into two main categories: resources, and then sort of belief systems, and a reluctance to give up on the status quo and that with which we're so familiar. So first of all, with resources, we have seen in the K-12 system across this country since March of 2020 that the digital divide that we all knew was there was really there. And we had chosen to look away from that, to tacitly acknowledge that we had many students for whom home broadband access was just not available. And we let that go on. March 2020 came along, and that was no longer an option. We had to look that digital divide square in the face and say, we have to do something about it. So in Highline, that meant that over a few week period, we deployed over 13,000 devices to make sure that every student had a working device. And then we worked constantly over the next several months with our local municipalities, with providers, with our foundation. We did fundraisers to raise money to sponsor families so that they could have home broadband access. We provided, I don't know how many thousands of hotspots, but it was a scramble to do that. And I think that what we've all realized now over the past year, and I'm grateful for people like our acting FCC Commissioner, Jessica Rosenworcel, saying that broadband is now an essential. It needs to be like a utility. Everybody needs to have it. We now know that our children can actually learn outside the walls of a school, and more importantly, they should be. And the fact that we have young people who do not have access at home to the learning that they need puts them at a disadvantage and prevents them from accessing the STEM opportunities and other opportunities that they are deserving of. So I think that making sure that we do not allow the digital divide to ever exist again is front and center. And we've done a fairly good job of that, I think. We just did a spring survey of our families in Highline, and 97% of the families surveyed said that they now have a working device at home and home broadband access. That's huge. That's a huge uptick from where we were a year ago. The other resource that we don't talk a lot about is the length of the school day. So a lot of times what prevents students from accessing more STEM courses is competing interests and priorities. We have a 6-period day in Highline, much to my dismay. I'd love for us to blow that up and have a very, very different kind of schedule, but we're not at that place yet. So when you only have 6 periods in a day and the state and the district have a certain number of graduation requirements, that limits your access and opportunity. So I would love for us to see an extended school day and extended school year so that students would have more opportunities to do that. And then when it comes to sort of antiquated belief systems, or actually just falsehoods and clinging to the status quo, I would say that this sadly still pervasive notion that some kids can't do STEM. And to the points that my colleagues here raised, more often than not, that's girls, that's our children of color, and that's our children without means and access. And we know that to be patently false. We know that when given the opportunity and the support, every student can excel in STEM fields, the ones that really, really resonate with them. We just know that. I have examples that I can give you from now until I don't know when, of how we have, when presented with the right resource and opportunities, our students have really, really been able to shine. So we've got to move away from the fact that STEM is just for certain types of people, certain types of kids, and provide people, the only way you change someone's belief system is to change their experience. So how do we highlight what it is that is happening that might make people rethink some of their own biases and antiquated ways of seeing the world. And then the last one that I will share under the notion of things that we need to leave behind and let go of, how we prepare teachers, how we support teachers needs to continue to evolve. Teacher pathways need to be more open and creative. When we've talked about this for years, but we haven't found a way to scale it. How can we take somebody from Microsoft who's hey, this Microsoft gig has been a kick, but I'm ready to do something different. I'd love to get in a classroom and, you know, educate the next generation of future engineers, but I don't want to go back to school for a year and learn how to do that. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that just because you've had a job that you can show up and be a teacher. Being a teacher does take training and skill. So there has to be some compromise, but how can we look at different ways for that certification? And then more importantly, how can we continue to provide our teachers with out of school learning opportunities that keeps them connected with STEM fields so that they can better connect their students' learning to career opportunities that they'll have available to them after they graduate?
That's great, Susan. And of course, you're just music to my heart when you talk about professional development support, because obviously that's what AVID does. And just even before I came to AVID, I really truly understood that when you treat educators like the profession they are, and you build those support systems for them so they can really focus on the classroom, they're just so very much grateful, and everybody benefits by it.
Absolutely.
Miriam, could you talk a little bit about Microsoft and your approach to the STEM opportunity gap, specifically in relationship to K-12 schools? And then also, if you could talk a little bit about why AVID and the work you're doing with TEALS makes sense in terms of that K-12 support as well.
Absolutely. So first thing I did want to touch on some of the things that Susan mentioned specifically and what Microsoft is addressing. And then I'll dig into K-12 quickly, because we do have an airband program, because we as Microsoft recognize the same barriers in terms of connectivity and getting our students the same access across the board. So we have several programs within Microsoft that do focus specifically on those access points to make sure that we have that baseline foundation to build our programs on. And then specifically, Susan keyed it up really well in terms of our TEALS program. So our TEALS program is specifically designed to bring industry professionals into the classroom to team teach computer science with those classroom teachers. And the goal is twofold: to provide those items that Susan mentioned for the students, access to those that are in industry that may look like them, make that industry more relatable for those students, but also specifically to train the teachers to hit on some of those PD items that she mentioned, to allow the teachers to both build on the PD provided by partners like AVID that bring that PD over the summer, but then that long-standing PD of learning from the volunteers throughout the class to support those teachers. So it's really providing a lot of those elements that Susan mentioned. And then of course, AVID, additionally, we're growing in terms of our partnership with them as they are bringing TEALS fully to one of our regions. So in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, AVID is actually a partner bringing that forward and enabling us to expand our reach even more.
That's great, Miriam. Thank you so much. Highlight, could you talk a little bit more about Amazon Future Engineers, your focus on equity and access to STEM, and then also any observations you have about the power of partnering with nonprofit, and particularly groups that do educator professional development like AVID?
Awesome, yes. So historically at Amazon Future Engineer, we really looked at our work in two main buckets. And the first was really in this bucket that we called Learn, where we wanted to find ways to get more schools in underserved communities from Title I schools. We wanted to get them professional development and curriculum to teach computer science. I think it's today still only about 50% of US high schools teach computer science, so we still have a long way to go. And the way we've always done that is by partnering with nonprofits. We know we are not curriculum creators, we are not PD providers, so we do our best to find awesome partners, such as AVID, Code.org, Project STEM, to really be the experts in that arena. And so what we've really done is try to find districts who are eager to get computer science going and making sure that they have the resources they need to start that. The second part of our work that we built early on was what we call our kind of build category, which is really about building your future, where each year we select 100 high school seniors from underrepresented and underserved backgrounds. to receive a $40,000 scholarship to study computer science and a guaranteed summer internship at Amazon, paid. And 95% of those students continue with us year after year in their internships. And so really we started thinking about, can we get full coursework into schools? Can we get students the pathway they need to be successful at Amazon? Most recently, and this kind of goes to a lot of what Susan was saying, we've seen that there's so many equity barriers, even if those are in place, where we would go to some of the schools that are implementing our curriculum and you step into the classroom that is learning computer science principles and it's all men. And so really we started to really think about what can we do earlier on and what can we do in the constraints of schools that can't afford a computer science teacher or have the scheduling concerns that Susan mentioned. When I was a teacher, that was a huge issue. So how can we really spark student interest earlier to change who ends up in that classroom later on? And so this is what we're calling our Explore bucket. And so we've worked with various nonprofits to build learning opportunities that would be accessible to any teacher or to teachers, maybe not just computer science teachers. And we've also had a pretty strong focus on career exposure. So connecting professionals similar to TEALS, not quite as in-depth, TEALS goes above and beyond in that area, but really connecting folks to classrooms to really share their journey. So students can hear it's not too late to get into STEM. There's not one path, there's not one job, there's not one person this is for, and really to change those stereotypes. And really most recently, our work with AVID has really been around this idea of how can we encourage students to take computer science before they get into that class. And so how can we engage teachers in other subject areas and equip them with knowledge and skills of computer science so that they can incorporate that into their curriculum and then perhaps later on get more of those students, more of those girls, students of color, into those classes. And so our work with AVID has really been around the training for a non-computer science teacher to teach computer science. And that's where we really see a big piece of equity equity work lies.
I love that. Computer science for non-computer science teachers. Just try it, right? If your experiences change and you find joy, then you will know that you can do it, as Susan said so well.
Exactly.
So I want to switch a little bit and talk about the value of the partnership from each of your individual perspectives. I know as early on as my principal position, I was always looking for business partners so that we could benefit the whole community on whatever the strengths were and the needs. And this is my first Social Innovation Summit. And I was really pleased in my first session this morning to see the wide variety of corporate with foundations and other nonprofits really coming together and talking about how can we support each other. So Susan, would you talk a little bit about some of the best models you've seen for K-12 business partnerships and what you've learned along your journey?
Yeah, so as a district that has partnered happily with AVID, with Microsoft, with Amazon and others for a long time, I actually think what's happening on this screen right now in this session is a great example of the kind of sort of interweaving that has to happen between business and nonprofits and K-12. Right? I mean, and I think that part of the problem is we remain too siloed at times, and then we don't maximize what those partnerships can really do. And so I love this conversation because it shows what the AVID, Microsoft, Amazon, K-12 sort of cohesive approach to improving learning for all kids and supporting our educators can do. I think that what makes for a great partnership from the K-12 perspective, looking at philanthropy and business, partnerships are absolutely essential. And it's really important from a superintendent's perspective that prospective partners seek to really understand what our needs are. Don't presume. Don't presume that you know what needs to be addressed. You know, talk to the people in education and then figure out where do your priorities and resources converge with the actual needs of children and educators in that particular school system. It's never going to be a one size fits all. And I want to be clear that there's some onus on the K-12 system as well to be more flexible. We are bureaucracies. I would argue that public K-12 education is the sort of the be all end all of bureaucracies. And so we can be very rigid as well. But I think that, as we know, true partnership under any circumstance requires some give and take and some getting to know one another so that you can really find out how you can create a strong movement that will lead to results. And so that would be my biggest thing. Don't presume coming in to know what needs to be fixed or addressed or improved. Really get to know what's going on. And I will also say too, as a superintendent leading a public education system that is richly diverse with a very, very strong commitment to equity, identity, and more importantly, racial equity, we want our partners to have that same commitment. So I think being very clear in how you are as an entity committed to issues of race, equity, and identity, and how you can bring that to bear to the technical aspects of the partnership with that K-12 system.
Yeah, really well said. When you can find value and really clearly define the problem you're solving or the vision you're moving towards, then you get strong partnerships and all the parties gain. Same question. Well, before I go to the next question, just a reminder to the audience that the Q&A link or function, I guess I should call it, is what you should be using to send questions in, because in about 3 to 5 minutes, we're going to open it up to a total Q&A. Please do not try to use the chat function. But Miriam, let's go to you next, and then we'll move on to Hyla. Same question from your perspective. Many businesses and nonprofit leaders are here today. What advice would you give them as they're wanting to build partnerships, especially if they're thinking about partnerships in the K-12 space?
So I agree that this is a great symbol in terms of who's here at the table having this conversation, because these are the partners that we use to do the work, whether it's our partnerships directly with the schools. And 100% agree with Susan that we never want to go into the school and tell the school what they need, but instead listen to the school and how we can support. And we also use vehicles like AVID and other nonprofits to really give us the understanding of the communities they serve and what they need. And we use them as the vehicle to bring our work forward, because they can provide the wraparound services and the customizations that those communities need, because they're on the ground and they understand them. And then with Amazon, a lot of times we do, because we're solving very similar problems as you've heard us describe, we have Amazon volunteers that volunteer for TEALS. So it is, we are working to break down those boundaries and really work together to solve the same problems. And so that partnership is really important to be able to, there's no way that TEALS would have the number of volunteers that we have if the entire industry didn't come forward and bring forth their volunteers to support the work. So the industry partnerships are important as well, so that we can all come together and support the work.
You know, Miriam, one of the things I found throughout my years of working with a wonderful man named Larry Stupsky, and he started a foundation. He was Charles Schwab's right-hand guy way back in the day. And one of the things that was so refreshing to me was for me to be in his world of understanding the corporate and what the issues were and the challenges, and then for him to be exposed to our world. And just being able to move back and forth, you gain so much, not only in the relationship, but in terms of the really truly understanding the value of what other organizations bring, which just motivates you more to continue down the partnership path. So well said about the volunteers. Hyla, can you weigh in here?
Yes, I just completely agree with everything that has been said from Susan and Miriam, and so awesome to hear all of that echoed. We believe that we're here, everything we're doing is to serve the schools that we can. And so if a product or service we're offering is not what's needed, then we need to switch gears. And so really, I just think that idea of not imposing on, but building with is incredibly important. And so one thing we've done here is after we've identified maybe something that a school really wants to offer, is this idea that we still need to be building it with educators. And I feel like that's something that we've really taken to heart. And so we have a Teacher of the Year award that we've started where we award 10 teachers each year, and then they're actually brought on to a teacher advisory council. And they meet with us monthly and advise on different products and services, and actually can then be weigh in on some of those. And really that's, I think, where our best work has come from, is how can our resources just elevate what educators who are in this field every day doing the hardest, best jobs in the world, how can we help you get what you need, and how can we help scale that? And so really it's that idea of, I think we're trying to always be better listeners and really just make sure that we're passing the microphone to those who should have it. And so I also love Miriam's point about the cross partnership too. And there's just so many ways that we believe that corporations could be working together more. And so we'll keep pushing that also. I'm grateful.
So Miriam and Hyla, you may not know the answer to this, but one of the participants would like to know, do you have any idea of the percentage of what you would define as a minority are currently serving in technical positions for your respective organizations? Or do you know if there are specific goals for growing those percentages? Miriam, do you have any idea?
I don't know those statistics off the top of my head, but we can certainly follow up with them. And I can also reach out to our HR department on the goals, because I know we do have goals around those. I just don't know exactly what those specific goals are for growth in that space.
You know, one of the things that has become very apparent in public education is that we also have a teacher pipeline issue, especially when it comes around diversity. And quite frankly, with what we've been through over the last however many months it's been now, that's probably just going to grow. And so one of the things we've been looking at a lot across the nation is what we call grow your own, where we've got pockets of students or instructional assistants or other really wonderful community members who would love to be in the education space, but as Susan said, may not be in the best position to just come in through the traditional trajectory. So I'd be curious if you know of any things that you're doing that are really creative in your areas to grow your own as well. But Hyla, do you happen to have any observations about the percentages inside of Amazon and or the goals?
I don't know for Amazon specifically, but I know for according to Reboot representation, it was 11% of top tech force positions are held by women currently. And I believe from 2040, or I can't remember the organization's name, but it was that 6% of top tech workforce roles were held by people of color. And that may be about 2 years old, and I can look for those. But similar to Miriam, we have specific diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And Amazon's definitely working to tackle that in a variety of ways, from internships, similar to Amazon Future Engineer, to investments in K-12. But I don't know exactly what the hard number goals are.
Sorry, Sandy, we actually have a partnership with Western Washington University. We call it our Bilingual Paraeducators pipeline. So we identify paraeducators in Highline who are bilingual because we have dual language schools across the district. And they go through a 2-year cohort program to get their teacher certification. And then we hire them as teachers. So we're growing our, and we have a similar now model for special education, because that's another area where we don't have a really solid, reliable pipeline.
Yeah, I know when we were in Salem Kaiser School District, when I was the superintendent there, we had the highest number of non-English speaking students in the state. So we were recruiting heavily from more Hispanic Latinx populations that came in bilingual, but it was really hard to ask them to leave their families.
Yeah.
And so we would recruit them in, and they may stay a few years and then they would go back. So looking at the internal talent is another way to provide that level of support.
Yeah.
Susan, one of the questions in the
I saw it. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think
How in the world did we not have bandwidth?
well, but you know what? So first of all, I want to provide some clarification, but you are so spot on to say, given your geographical location, how unconscionable was it that we had K-12 students who didn't have that? Think about for my colleagues in rural communities, in areas that are not near a major metropolitan tech hub like we are here outside Seattle. So I think that that's been the big sort of wake up call for all of us in this country. Let me clarify about the 13,000 devices. We didn't purchase all of those. What we did, we had purchased some additional ones before the pandemic just because we needed to do a refresh. But those 13,000 were existing devices that we had to deploy to students to take home. So because when we sent kids home, since we weren't a one-to-one district at the time, not all of them had a working device. So we had to go through the district, get all of our devices together to make sure that any student who didn't have a device at home had it. And that's what I reference around those 13,000. But I will say that I've lobbied very hard locally at the state level and the national level on this issue. I think that it is one that we have to continue to face, because I can tell you right now, the advances, and I'm going to be clear, the devices are actually the easy part. It's easier for us to get the devices. Sure. The ensuring the home broadband access is the harder thing. And that's where we have to put our attention, because I do have some children and families I know whose contracts are going to run out. And we're right now figuring out what's the sustainability plan. But this isn't something, and I'm just going to come back to partnerships. This is not something that school districts can or should have to solve alone. Right? This is bigger than public K-12 education. And so I think it needs to be a bigger conversation at the national level around what are we going to do to make sure that our children can learn 24/7, regardless of whether they're physically in school or not, because we have the technology to do it. Now we have to marshal the collective will to put the resources in place to achieve it.
Susan, your comment about how quickly the shutdowns came, I have a colleague in Tennessee who they shut down so quickly, and then they were totally out of cleaning supplies across the community. And all of a sudden he remembered all of those hand sanitizer Clorox boxes that elementary kids bring to school every year. So he went in and collected a lot of them up. But a lot of people didn't understand that when you're dealing with children and the shutdown comes, nobody goes back in, right? So I
will just put a little, we were fortunate, not fortunate. The first school that shut down was just north of Seattle. And so I had colleagues, we were sort of at the forefront of the national shutdown. So I had a little bit of notice and warning. And so we put in some pretty early supply orders so that we weren't caught off as much guard by others.
That's great. Miriam, could you or Hyla, I'm now moving off the Q&As that we're starting to get. Hyla, maybe you could go first. Do you do any pre-service work with teachers on STEM?
Pre-service work right now, we have actually been discussing with different partners the possibility to, especially thinking about how could we get computer science or computational thinking into early teacher education programs. It's something we're considering. It's not something we've historically done yet.
How about you, Miriam?
I would agree. We're at about the same stage. We're definitely partnering with partner universities and colleges that we're just, thought partners with in terms of how we can address that, and partnering again with organizations across computer science like CSTA and such, as we're all sort of thinking about how to address that concern, but we don't have an active program. It's sort of in the stages of thought partnership and thinking through how to solve.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because there was a reflective comment in there about shouldn't STEM become a national agenda for education? And if it's going to become a national agenda, it would not only include the partnerships that we've been discussing, corporate, with K-12, with nonprofit, but it would also move into the university level and really just building a whole robust system. And I would say all the way from pre-K through, right? The more students get exposure to the kinds of careers that they may not see in their own families, then the more likely they are to express some interest in learning more about that early on. Susan, there's a question in here. I know you know that AVID has a strong tutorial that we do inside of the elective in the middle and the senior high. We're currently working on accelerating learning, our accelerating learning initiative that's really looking at the truly best practices when it comes to engaging learning and specifically around tutoring. Can you talk about any best practices you've seen in terms of tutoring with students, specifically on things like inquiry or problems of practice, not just teaching them the math solutions, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So we actually, again, lots of learnings and opportunities have come out of this past year. There have been tremendous hardships and challenges and heartbreaks, but a lot of opportunity, and I think bright spots for hope as well. One of them is we have partnered with an organization called Paper, and they provide 24/7 online tutoring for students. And what I've heard from our students, the power of that is really helping them think through their essay, not just telling them that they misspelled something. It's better than that. So to your point, Sandy, the tutoring isn't just about how am I helping this young person, get to the answer, figure it out. How am I engaging with this one person in the learning process? And we have found, we're hearing from parents and students. It's a relatively new partnership. It's been going now for about 6 months, but we're hearing from students and families that they appreciate that. And again, but this comes back to broadband access, because think about your typical high school student. High school students live on a very different circadian rhythm than the rest of us as adults. And so if I'm a high school student, I'm likely doing my homework at 11 o'clock at night because that's when I'm doing it. And it's unlikely that anyone in my house will be awake or able to help me with my calculus homework. So the fact that I can log on and get that kind of assistance at that time, I think is critical. And I think we're going to see more of that. But Sandy, I would also pair that will never, even though I appreciate the face-to-face through the screen that we're getting through that partnership, it will never replace the in-person interaction between an adult and a child, right, in that learning process. And so we're investing heavily in the coming year for after school tutoring, especially for our students, because to your point, Sandy, we're looking at an acceleration model as well. So we are not going to hold our kids back. We are going to meet them where they are and propel them forward. And that may mean some small group instruction. It may mean I'm going to have you doing something differently over here than others are doing over there. But, I started in talking about our Highline promise to know every student by name, strength, and need. I would argue that that is the mission for all of us right now. And with technology, we are better equipped to deliver on that promise. Again, it's collective will. And ultimately, are we as the adults willing to make our lives challenging and potentially uncomfortable in order to do right by our children? Because that's how it works.
Yeah. Susan, you're reminding me of a listening session I was having with a group of high school students in Salem. And like a lot of districts, we had high schools came from more middle to upper income families, and then schools that had, huge numbers of children on free and reduced lunch. And the listening session that just broke my heart was when this young man from a school that had a high poverty rate said, "And don't tell me that keeping the library open at night is equity." Because that's not equity. You're assuming I can get back into the school. You're assuming I've got the time to do that. You're assuming a whole lot of things. So it's where we don't want to make those assumptions, and we do want to check with families to see what they really need.
Exactly.
There's a comment in here, and I'll weigh in on it. And then Susan, if you would do the same, and then also from the corporate perspective, we do know that there's E-rate funding that is becoming available for devices and bandwidth access, et cetera. And the question is, what's the best way to get that information out there? My response would be, go to the organizations that are having frequent contact with school districts all the time. For instance, of course, I would advocate for AVID to be one of those organizations because we are pervasive and invasive in and out of schools. But I would also encourage that going through some of the state organizations and especially listening for what is it that's making it hard for school districts to be able to access that funding? Is it because it's too competitive? Is it because they're a small district and they don't have staff that can immediately jump on the opportunities? So that would be my reflection. Susan, do you want to add to that?
I would echo everything you said, Sandy, about AVID's potential role in helping with that, as well as sort of looking at the state and the school level to enter. I will say, I do want to make this clear though, too. We have talked appropriately so about the truly heroic work that so many of our teachers have done over the past year. I would add though, some of the unsung heroes, the ones who have made sure our children had meals. Those folks never went home. They showed up every day from March until now. I would also argue, relevant to here, our technology staff, our chief technology officers and Department of Technology Services teams in our districts. Those are the ones, Sandy, who are really finding creative ways to make sure that we maximize E-rate. I can tell you that I and other superintendents have lobbied for changes in E-rate funding and how that works, and we will continue to do that. But I do think that, and I've put this out as a pipe dream for a long time. Why is it that every school district needs to find a way to communicate about the same thing that's happening nationally? Why can't we once and for all, why couldn't Amazon and Microsoft and others do a national campaign to help make sure every district understands E-rate, to help make sure that the emergency broadband benefit information gets out to every family? Instead, we put that on individual districts. And to your point, Sandy, not every district has the staff or resources to get that information out. So I think we've got to look at, to your point, how can AVID be sort of central in getting that information, out to folks and making sure that folks are using it. I wish we could have a more strategic conversation at some point about communications as well.
Yeah. Hyla, Miriam, can you see ways that corporate could help in terms of getting information out to educators about E-rate?
Yeah, I can start. I think I completely agree. Having formerly been a director of technology that filled out E-rate forms, like I specifically can directly relate to the problem. I agree. From our perspective, because we have a program like TEALS, where we truly do have partners on the ground working with our schools, we do have a vehicle, and we do our best and certainly can continue to do better in terms of our partner schools, ensuring that they're informed of the opportunities, because we know it's a barrier to bring our programs forward, and it's just a barrier for equity for the students at those schools and districts. And so to be able to bring the federal, national programs forward, along with our awarenesses of what state programs might be relevant, we are working to inform our regional managers in terms of those on the ground, and then partners like AVID that are also bringing TEALS to our schools on the ground, ensuring that we're all sharing that content so that we can make sure those schools are aware. But I agree, Susan, it would be great to have a more cohesive way of communicating those, because I know back in the day, I was certainly like doing my own due diligence of trying to solve those problems in a space where it felt like I was doing it by myself. So completely understand the problem.
Hyla?
Yeah, no, I think this is an awesome call out for us, and it's something that I think can definitely do a better job of, is really thinking about how do we also knowledge share around other funding opportunities, especially this for E-rate would be awesome. And so I think there's plenty of ways, whether it's through our partners, through our own direct streams, or through other Amazon channels, that we could be doing that better. And it's something that I will 100% take back to our team, and makes me realize the power of these conversations, right? Each one.
So
yeah, go ahead.
So Hyla, if Jeff Bezos can go into space, we can certainly figure out how
work on it.
to make sure that every child in this country, every family member, every district member knows how to access these resources.
Maybe you could just send down some postcards to everybody too while he's up there. Remind us all. It'd be great.
That was great timing, Susan. There's a reflection in the Q&A chat that I think each of us can relate to, and that is that we are all serving as minorities in traditionally male-dominated fields, right? And my running joke when I first became a superintendent is a lot of people get the superintendent job because they look like one. And if you haven't had a lot of females in the superintendency and then you apply, you don't look like one yet, right? So you have to figure out, okay, first of all, how do I get the job? And then after that, what is it that I need to be successful? And so the reflection in there is, what do you think females, and specifically, need to be successful in the STEM arena? And I would answer it as a minority in the superintendency, that what I needed to be successful were friendships. I needed people to say that it was okay to call them and to say, what is it you don't know? What are you trying to achieve? How can I be a thought partner with you? And frankly, it didn't have to be a female. In fact, a lot of times it was more powerful. I built my network in terms of diversity, the more success was ensured that I had a robust set of support to rely on. So Hyla or Miriam, let's start with you this time. Can you think of things that females need to be successful in the STEM space?
Sure. Prior to joining Amazon, I was the National STEM Director for KIP Foundation. And we partnered with NCWIT, National Center for Women in Information Technology. And one of our big projects was increasing the percentage of women in all of our AP computer science courses, where prior to this push, although KIP historically served about 99% students of color, when you went into our classes, the gender divide was huge. And so what NCWIT really advised on is that encouragement, although it sounds really silly, like just say encouragement is a huge factor, was that really could change the game. So we actually had school leaders, teachers write notes, pull girls aside and say, hey, I actually think you'd be really awesome in this field. And simply by just instituting their encouragement, we had 50% female enrollment in 1 year across 17 schools in computer science courses. So I think there is sort of number one, that awareness piece, like you've got to measure it. You've got to see your gender gap. You've got to then have the encouragement to push more girls to do it. And then here from Amazon, what we're seeing that maybe that we've heard that from teachers that is really helpful is connecting females in tech to classrooms so that girls can hear earlier on in your 7th grade science class, you can meet a software development engineer and you can hear how, yeah, I didn't actually learn about computer science till I was in my freshman year of college. And then look, here I am. So I think those the role of role models also. But I will never forget that NCWIT's biggest piece of feedback was encouragement works, and to really see that power was pretty cool.
Yeah, Miriam?
So my team has recently taken on a program called Tech Resilience that we have within Microsoft. And it's a mentoring program for Microsoft employees to work with higher ed students who are at the beginning of their career. And so, but as I've been taking this program on and looking through the content, it really has made me think about what my experience was going through computer science. And it really enforces things like belonging and coping with being an only and those types of feelings that not just women, but all minorities within tech experience, right?
Mhm.
That helps them not only have that connection that you talked about, Sandy, with that mentor, but also allows them to feel not like an only, feel like there is someone, even if they don't look like you, they also have felt like an outsider in a scenario. They also have had these same feelings of not really feeling like you belong within that space. So there's a lot of content there that really helps students. And again, this is currently geared toward higher ed students at the beginning of their CS career. But overall, a lot of the content there is really valuable for building that sense of belonging within technology.
You know, we're going to go ahead, Susan, but we are going to need to wrap
Really quickly,
here.
I know we're wrapping up, but I would just say, and you've all touched on it, the power of networking. And how do we not just do it for ourselves because we need it, but model that for our students. And then, you know, and we've touched on this, that tap on the shoulder that I think Hyla alluded to really matters. And that notion of, if you can't see it, it's really hard to be it. And I think about my friend Trish Tiziko, who you probably know, Miriam, from the Technology Access Foundation, who just, you know, as a Black woman in tech said, I got to do something about this. And we need to help our young people, and especially our young girls of color, see themselves in this field if we're ever going to change it. And so I think people, those visionaries and partners who step out and make that a reality and help our children see it so they can be it is so important.
Miriam, I think I told you I've become addicted to audibles, and I'm a voracious reader anyway. And not mentioning the politics, but Stacey Abrams has a book called Leading from the Outside, and chapter 4 is all about what you just said. It's recognizing that you are an other, and how do you build a network and a support system so that you know you're not alone. So thank you so much for being so personal and sharing that. So we have a podcast, and it ends with, tell me about that one thing. It's a free podcast called Tech Talk for Teachers, and I'm loving listening to it. So what's the one thing that you hope that people take away from the session today? And I'll start with Miriam.
Hope, which is, I just hope they walk away from this with hope and partnership, not just the partnership that we've talked about today, but partnership, knowing that we're all partners in this work overall.
Excellent. Susan?
I would hope a sense of power and self-efficacy. We can all be part of this solution. We can all educate ourselves on what the needs are in our communities. And then, you know, and it doesn't even take money, just getting the word out, using your social media networks and others to help people understand that we need to ensure that every child has access 24/7 to their sort of learning experience. We can all play a part in that. And so I hope that it's something that binds us together and compels us to take action.
Kyla?
I'd say fired up. We got a ton of work to do, but I think also the hope that small things can really make a huge difference quickly. But yeah, I hope we all stay super fired up.
Super fired up. Great job to the panel. Thank you so very much for participating today. If you have questions or follow-up, you can find me at shusk@avid.org, or you can go through our AVID Care Center, and we'll be happy to build more partnerships and keep you connected with those that were on the panel today. So have a wonderful rest of a conference, and thank you very much from my home to yours.